We've come together today because we actually want to respond to a podcast that we have both listened to that was published on the 19th of June. It was The Diary of a CEO. It was Stephen Bartlett, and it was the Feminism Debate. But we will, and I will, quote you some quotes from that to why we feel the need to publicly respond on behalf, I suspect, of quite a lot of single mothers. Hi there. I'm doing something a little bit more unusual today. I'm putting a disclaimer at the top of this podcast. I'm feeling the need to do that, having listened back to the full podcast now, because I recognize that as two single mothers, I think that we have very much responded to the Diary of the CEO podcast of the rise of feminism as single mothers. What I really want to do is to offer a disclaimer on that, to say that we believe that no matter what we've said are the sentiments of all mothers returning to work, that there should be no judgment for anybody that bears children and comes back to work, and that to be called narcissistic mothers in the response to the podcast in this instance, we feel is unjust and unfair. So whilst the content, I think, probably leans a little bit heavier to the single mother, we believe the sentiments are the same for all. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoy the podcast, and please subscribe and do leave a comment afterwards. Thank you. Enjoy. Hello. Welcome back to episode 4 of the Voices on the Edge of Change. I'm here with a really good friend, actually, and business partner, Claire Preston. Claire and I met a few years ago, actually. I know you have just said you're a very good friend, but you have come into my life and we've just become absolute incredible soulmates. And I love that about us. And the more we've got to know each other, not just through work, but through our own personal journey, we realize that we just have so much in common. And because of that, we're now in an amazing piece of work together, doing a fantastic project that we're bringing out, hopefully by the time people are listening to this podcast. Yeah. We're certainly piloting at the moment, which is great. The name that we're working on at the moment is something called Project 101. And it is a starting base for the first 100 days into work for anybody of school leaver age up to the age of about 25 when you leave university. And we hope that it will be a really good opportunity to understand everything that you have to navigate when leaving education and stepping into employment. But strangely, that's not what this podcast is about. As much as we would love to promote ourselves, and we will do that, by the way, later on, I came across Claire because we went skiing. We went to a yoga retreat, but I also knew Claire from a previous life when I worked at Women in Change. And Claire is a phenomenal coach. She's a lot more than that, so I'm going to let her do a lot more justice to herself in just a moment. But we, by dinner, not only have put the world's to rights written Project 101, we had quite a lot in common about being single mums. And I think that we think that single mums sometimes get a bit of a hard rap. And we hadn't really thought to talk about it, had we, Claire, until this point? But we've come together today because we actually want to respond to a podcast that we have both listened to that was published on the 19th of June. It was The Diary of a CEO. It was Stephen Bartlett. And it was the Feminism Debate. But we will, and I will, quote you some quotes from that to why we feel the need to publicly respond on behalf, I suspect, of quite a lot of single mothers. But before I do that, hi, Claire. That was a long intro. I'm sorry.
Oh, it was one of your wonderful introductions. I'm happy with that. You know what? Honestly, thank you, Lou, for having me here today. But I love what you said, and I appreciate you all of the kind words. But in life, I think one of the greatest joys in life is meeting people that you admire and connect with, and to be able to become friends with those people is just such an honor and a privilege. So that sounds like I really am bigging you up here, and that's deserved. It's deserved for this. But yeah, the feeling is mutual, and I'm very excited to be working with you, but also to be talking to you about this really important topic that we could go on and on and on about, and hopefully will. But at the moment, I am working as a coach and consultant in the northeast, based in the northeast of England. but I work nationally and internationally. I have worked across a range of sectors, largely in education and training, but also in the charitable and commercial sectors. And I love what I do because I believe that growth doesn't have an expiry date and that everybody deserves the chance to grow and learn. And that lifelong learning journey is something that's really important to me. Excited to be working with you. Excited to be on the podcast. Let's get started.
Well, let's jump right in then. So, we've had a similar journey in life. We have been either with partners or married. We have one child for all sorts of reasons, and our children have had some challenges, but also we have had to navigate quite a difficult world of being a single mum. And we know that some of that comes with quite a lot of views from people. And single mum, when I say the word single mum for our listeners, I'm not being judgmental. I mean, you can be a single mum for a multitude of reasons. And sometimes out of a divorce, sometimes out of choice, sometimes not out of choice. And I think that when we talk about it for the sake of the listeners of this podcast, it's really, really important that we're not judging anybody for being a single mother in any circumstances that they find themselves in. And even if you have a fairly supportive divorced husband or whatever that might be, that doesn't necessarily come in the way that it needs to come. And I would say, because I'm going public with some of this, I had a very supportive ex-husband in many ways in terms of stability for my daughter, but, financially not. And that therefore became quite a challenge for me as a mother. And so the reason why I'm just putting all that out there as a precursor to what we say next is because there's no judgment about why anybody or even a single parent. And I think that we're specifically looking at this from the eyes of a mother. And the reason for that is because, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, we are raising our voices. As you know, I am a voice for impact, but we are raising both our voices on this feminism debate that's happened on the 19th of June. And the other reason why Claire and I feel so strongly about this debate, and I know you said this, Claire, so please jump in, is because we're shocked that there hasn't been many responses to that podcast. And that podcast was the Feminism Debate, 19th of June, 2025. And it was going really well for me until about halfway through it was nearly a 3-hour podcast from what I remember. And they started to talk about a couple of themes. And we'll come on to each theme separately. For the sake of our listeners, let me tell you a couple of things that they mentioned. So around the 1 minute 33 mark, the conversation touches on the idea that some modern parenting choices, particularly mothers that might want to return to work early or want perhaps to rely on daycare, could be interpreted as, hear this, narcissistic mothers. Erica Camisa, a psychoanalyst, suggests that children need consistent maternal presence in early years and that prioritizing your career over caregiving may actually result in a cultural shift of self-interest. Well, at that point, I nearly fell over. Then it said, poor mothers looking after children. This was about the 1 hour, 12-minute mark. There's a discussion about how lower income mothers are often forced to make difficult choices and how society fails to support them adequately. Yet even here, the tone implies that ideal mothering only happens at home, which I felt, and I know you did, Claire, which is why we're here, felt like a judgment yet again on working mothers. The third thing that sprung to mind, and again, we're going to get into it in this podcast because you and I spoke about this, Claire, was I wonder if Stephen Bartlett in this case, had been asked to take time off to raise his children, if he were highlighting that gendered expectation and caregiving, would he hesitate to do that? Would anyone judge him? What would be the standards around a man doing this? And then the podcast acknowledges the guilt, to be fair, that many women felt returning, but they still felt overwhelmingly that whilst this created guilt, that really it was about caregiving and giving the gold standard of caregiving. So the question is, are Claire and I narcissistic mothers for being, in our view, providing for our children and being caregivers at the same time? In the eyes of this podcast, we are portrayed as narcissistic mothers. Very interestingly, Claire, when I asked you to come on this podcast, I was talking to a friend of mine and I did ask if I could quote her. So she said, yes, absolutely. So she's a lady called Shira Schiller, and she and I met because we were putting our children into daycare. And I won't lie, watching them cry from the window as we left and ran to the station, of which, by the way, we would then cry on the train. And I told her about this at dinner and she was furious. And she said, Lou, we were not narcissistic mothers. We were narcissistic mothers. And I love that. I mean, narcissistic, not even a word in the dictionary, but I believe we could get it in there if we try.
I think we need to get that trending. Narcissistic mothering, absolutely.
So tell me, Claire.
Narcissistic parenting, yeah.
So that
It is. It's outrageous. It's outrageous, isn't it? And yeah, we did. I remember us sharing the podcast and saying, I won't swear, but what the hell? Like, and maybe there has been lots of noise and reaction to this that we haven't seen, but I'm just really shocked, like you said, that we haven't heard more people talking about it. It's absolutely staggering. But like you said, there are various aspects of this that we really need to delve into, but shocking, really. Great that Stephen Bartlett had this conversation. But as you say, wow, the fact that there is such a sort of a disproportionate response and also that gender bias, wow, just staggering. So much we could talk about and get angry about.
Well, I think we should. And the reason why I think we should is because there's a lot of people out there right now probably feeling exactly as we do. I know Anna Whitehouse has done a huge amount of work in mothers returning. I've seen a lot of conversations on LinkedIn recently about how difficult it is to return from maternity leave in the first place, actually, or even to take time off and then return. The fact that it's just expected that women have to do both and actually give up their careers in order to bring up kids well. And I know there are some people that are really fortunate in life. I have a wonderful sister-in-law who, has brought up 3 gorgeous, gorgeous children and has been able, because her husband is making it able and they have a good opportunity to bring up their children in a way that they want to bring up their children. But that is because he has a very successful career. That is not the norm. That is absolutely not real life. And I get really upset when I feel that women constantly still, this day, 2025 we're talking about, have to make choices. And yet if women don't bear the next generation, there won't be a next generation and workforce of people. So the first truth, I suppose, in response to this podcast, Claire, that we should get into is survival is not selfish. Tell me why you don't think. Tell me your story of survival not being selfish.
Well, as you said, I didn't have a choice. I was a single parent from my daughter being very small. And I think I need to say as well that I did have a very supportive family. I won't dispute that for a second. Lots of people don't have that support network around them. However, I had no financial support from my partner whatsoever. And I had to make a decision about whether or not I was prepared to manage on benefits or go to work. That was the decision. Now, for me, that wasn't a choice. I needed to go to work and to earn. And I didn't want my daughter to be brought up in that situation where we were just on the breadline and surviving on benefits. I don't agree with that. And if you're able to work, then I think you should for lots of reasons, but that's possibly a very different debate. But for lots and lots of reasons, it wasn't a choice. It really wasn't. If I wanted my daughter to have the best possible start in life, that meant me going to work. End of story. I did go straight back to work after maternity leave. I did work then part-time, and then I went back to study again so that I could go back into education, so that I knew that I had a career that would support us into the future. So for me, that wasn't a choice. And I know for many, many people, that isn't a choice. It is about, it's more, and why should we only just survive, Lou? Seriously, why is that okay to just survive? Yes, of course, we can be brilliant caregivers if we're at home. Yes, of course we can. But surviving on the bare minimum, for me, wasn't an option. I think there's much more to life than that. And I felt that I would be a better person going to work, not only because of what I could then provide, but because of the satisfaction and the self-esteem and all of the other things that working provided.
Yeah, and I think, I didn't have as much of a supportive family. And I don't mean that to be negative to my family, but most of my family worked themselves. So this isn't necessarily a dig at them.
Yeah.
And the ones that didn't really feel it was their position to have to take on a full-time child. I think where I was extremely lucky, and it is luck, is that between the daycare centre and the after-school Claire, I had a really good, we had the same person most of her life after school. So for me, I think what was she, 6 when I became a single mother to the age of 16, we probably had no more than 3 people in her life looking after her, which I think in that time frame is really quite something remarkable. I think the other thing I would just say, and again, I'd love to hear the response of others, but if you stay with it, and if you can stay within your same sort of postcode for that time, and I know that again, that's a whole other debate and we won't go down that road, but I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And that therefore meant I had a network, right? And I'm sure you've had a really good network. So that network of people where, that phone call, that dreaded phone call at 2:00 in the afternoon where you've just got a slight temperature running in the nursery and you're stuck and it's an hour's train journey home. There's generally somebody that can jump to the rescue for an hour or an hour and a half. But, for me, what you said about the economic realities, the system gaps, the emotional toil, I think, I don't know about you, but the only way I could look after my daughter and bring my daughter up after I got divorced was I had to buy property or I had to pay rent. And at either of those stages, the only way I could do that was to earn money and to put food on the table and do that. And just to give you a sense, I suppose, was I actually asked my daughter the other day if I was a narcissistic mother. And I told her about the word narcissistic, which she just loved. Really interesting, her response was, do you know what, Mum? If you hadn't have done that, being an only child, I wouldn't have known how to share. I wouldn't have known how to engage with others. I wouldn't have known how to be inclusive. I would team player. I wouldn't have the values I have today. And I wouldn't know what hard work and graft means. She really felt that. And she said, Mum, no judgment. I absolutely think you did everything you could and you've given me, in her view, I'm putting, ask her, reach out to her. She said, you've given me the best start and understanding. And actually what she finds, and this is another conversation, that some of her friends that have been brought up in a nuclear family with quite a lot of privilege don't feel the need to work very hard.
Yeah, I totally get that. I had a similar conversation with my daughter, and yesterday in the car, I asked her again, told her that we were going to be talking today. And I have to say, she probably wasn't as positive as your daughter. She was, and as you said, both of our daughters have had issues, really big challenges to overcome. And she did say, I don't know how it would have been if you hadn't been a working mom, which is true. We don't.
We don't. No.
But she did say that if money was no issue, then of course it would have been nice to have me at home all the time and not be worried about what time I was going to be able to pick her up or whether I was going to be able to attend certain things or whether I was going to be away working and she'd have to stay with different members of the family. So there was all that sort of all those questions for her about would that have been necessary and how different would that have felt? But she did say, on the other hand, I have learned a lot from you. I like being able to tell my friends what you do for a job and that you help other people. I have learned about how to talk to other people. I've learned about charity. I've learned about all sorts of things that we talk about in terms of education and personal growth and resilience and careers and things. So yes, of course she sees the advantages. I think it's really hard, isn't it? Because it's not just about the money. It's not just about what that then provided. It's really is about looking at the other things that brings. But as we said, we'd all like the perfect work-life balance. But as we've discussed previously, rent and shoes and sports subscriptions, if you want to go and do any after-school activities, that doesn't wait for the right balance. That does not wait for work-life balance. That has to be paid, and we have to find a way of doing that if we're on our own. And it's it's down to us.
Yeah, and look, we haven't really got into guilt, but I know that I've been riddled with guilt. Interestingly, that whilst I came from a divorce background, my mother didn't work, but I didn't reap the benefits in my view because my mother, dare I say this on a live podcast, I think she might agree, wasn't really particularly maternal. So she didn't really want to be involved in after school clubs or in fact, we didn't go to them. I didn't go to drama school. I didn't go to all the things that I might have wanted to have gone to. I'm not even sure my brother did, to be honest, because we didn't grow up with a mother that I see with some of my stepdaughters, particularly. And I talk to my stepdaughters because my daughter's not married yet, but where they are slapping them from one place to another, running with them. You've got a wonderful daughter that's a big hockey player. I've got now grandchildren who are football players. They are running all the time with them everywhere, all over the country, as is my brother with his children. So we didn't grow up in that environment. So I can't say that from being a child that grew up in the nuclear family, be it step parent, but with the opportunity to provide transport to do those things, that just didn't happen. So, this ideal moment that because you have a mother that stays at home means that they will be nurturing doesn't necessarily mean, to me, doesn't, because I've not experienced that. So I can only talk from my own experience. But obviously I did want to reclaim that for my daughter. I did want her to have all that. So whilst it may not have been me at everything, and I get that, and I'm sure there are things that she might say, because I'm not going to sit here and I don't think I've been the perfect mother, but she knows she hasn't missed opportunities because I did work, if that makes sense. If anything, I think I worked harder to make sure who could take her, could I get back to pick her up, could her dad perhaps do something once in a while, So reclaiming ideas and showing up in the world, I think, has been really important, modeling some form of resilience to our children.
Absolutely. It's leadership, Lou. It's leadership, isn't it? Because you're coping and overcoming challenges that are presented in terms of the things that we are having to juggle and take care of, and that problem solving and decision making. We are modeling all of that. And it's leadership skills that I believe that we are teaching our children through that single parenting and being a working mum.
And what would you say, you're talking about modeling resilience and the caregiving side. What bits do you think your daughter is showing now as a result of that? Or what do you think she really loves about what you've done around that? Can she see that in you now?
Well, it's hard to know, Lou, being completely honest, because as you've said, she is a sports person. So she does play hockey, and obviously that nurtures certain characteristics, doesn't it, in terms of leadership?
Yeah, definitely.
But she is a leader. She will take the lead in certain situations. Although she's not confident in every sense, she is confident in certain situations that surprises people. I do not believe that would be the case if she hadn't seen that and learned that from myself or other professional people around me. So I think there's been, and it's about role models. Hey, we talk about role models a lot, and we do within that we're working on. And young people need role models. And yes, of course, that could be a loving, caring mother. But like you said, just because that mum isn't working, it doesn't mean that they're a loving, caring mother. And we could be a loving, caring mother, thank you very much, as a working mum. So we can model care and generosity and nurturing, but there's also that role model element in terms of the other skills and characteristics that we can then share as a working parent.
Yeah, no, I really think that role modeling and values, and we haven't really talked about values, but I'm all about my values, and I feel that I almost live and die by my values. And one of the things I've always been really struck by with my daughter is her emotional intelligence. And it's something that actually you and I are talking about teaching, and we know, and I quote him on almost every podcast. Do you know what? I got to get this guy on my podcast. I think I have quoted Ed Kerwin. There's a competition. How many times have I quoted Ed Kerwin on a podcast? Anyone listening, if you get the right answer, you get a podcast from me. But seriously, Ed goes round the whole of the school system around the world now, with a company called Empathy Studios, actually teaching children emotional intelligence, because he believes, having been a school teacher, that you can teach emotional EQ, emotional intelligence, and to be emotionally aware. And that is one thing throughout my whole daughter's childhood I have been really, really struck. Words that when she was very young, saying, things like, Mummy, she's so sad, that lady over there. Have you seen her face? I mean, I look round and I think, how did you see that? Or, Mummy, did you see that man on the street? He only had one leg. I mean, it was just very, very obvious to me that she, and I think actually, because you know her so well, ironically, you will know that she worries about everybody and everything. So, maybe it's gone slightly the other way. But her emotional intelligence and her resilience, actually, I would say, is probably her second strongest quality. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about that, haven't we? Yes, resilience definitely is. And that is such an important life skill, isn't it? And there's lots and lots that is reported and talked about at the moment in terms of the lack of resilience in young people these days, and how helicopter parenting and overprotection has been created a massive issue for our children, because there are just there's a lack of opportunity now for young people to take measured risks and controlled risks, and to actually learn and be curious and try things and grow. So I think that resilience is something that is a massive issue, and I'm really proud, like you say, of the fact that we have actually developed that in our girls. And like we say, we'll never know. We'll never know what they would have been if we hadn't been working mums. But I do believe that is one of the things that we have had to teach them, because they've seen we've struggled. Those struggles have been real, and I'm not proud of the fact that she's seen me struggle. But my daughter has witnessed that life can be hard. It's not meant to be easy. It's not real, like you say. So I think they do need to see that reality can be really challenging, but things get better. And there are ways that you can deal with. There are decisions that we can make. We have control over those decisions, and we can actually make decisions and change the way that's the direction of things, and help to improve things with resilience and optimism and hard work. So I think resilience is definitely one of the things that we would have to say we've embedded in our children.
Yeah, and I think the other one, which you've touched upon quite a bit, but maybe not named it as such, but decision making, because I think that, even if it was, do I get the 93 bus home or the 13, which will get me there faster? Do I want to sit downstairs so it might be safer, or upstairs where I just feel like being a bit of a rebel? And we've all done both, right? So let's face that. But that sense of decision making, timekeeping, understanding where they have to be by a certain time because they've got to make their own way there or home. And again, like you say, I wouldn't necessarily choose that over and over for my daughter again. Of course not. I think the reason why we're on this podcast, and I want to keep bringing us back to the reason why we're making this podcast, right, is because to be labeled potentially or allegedly as a narcissistic mother, to me, just made me feel sick. I just thought, in what world did I wake up, decide to have a child, to be a narcissistic mother? And having been on the end of pure narcissism in my life, not just once, a few times, I think, is that what people really think I am?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really inappropriate and insulting in so many ways. Going back to what you were saying about the decision making, I saw a great clip with Sharon Stone being interviewed recently, and she talked about how her mother and her grandmother had very challenging upbringings. And as a result, Sharon Stone's mother was really quite tough with her. And Sharon said to her at one point, "Why didn't you ever allow me to lean on you?" And she said, "Because I taught you to stand on your own two damn feet. That was my gift to you. That was my gift to you." Because she hadn't been able to do that, and her own mother hadn't been. So she saw that as a gift. And it's that tough love, isn't it? It's actually making those decisions, that tough love that actually enables the resilience and the problem solving and the decision making. That doesn't happen. That isn't nurtured unless we are allowing children to find that out for themselves and modeling that for them.
Yeah, and I think, a couple of things when we talk about modeling. And when we've been talking about being a single mum, and I know that you've done this and I've done this, but one of the things I did do in order to be there for her more, particularly in senior school, because that's where I was most worried I would lose connection, was to actually be elected onto the board of governors for the school and to be part of it was a new school as it so happened, and it needed to be physically built from the ground up. So I got really involved. I was also in special needs, which unfortunately at the time my daughter needed. So, I was able to get right stuck in from day one as chair of special needs and as part of that community school. And so I found myself in the school doing the work for the school because it was part of the outreach and allowed as part of my own career journey. And I think in some cases, ironically, I was there more than most parents. I was more visible than most parents. I was more engaged because I understood the school than most parents. And I say that over and over because even though I was a single mother working my fingers to the bone, I actually was still trying to be really creative in how I could carve out the right time to be involved in my daughter's education. So, and I say that not for any halo award, for people to think that I've got a big head. I don't. I say it because I want to give hope to other mothers that are feeling like I am, thinking, how do I get more involved? How does my employer support me? How does somebody realize that actually it's not a bad thing and actually I can give back in different ways and show my daughter that actually I can still be present, I can still show up, I can actually influence in the school for the better of all the children, by the way, not just my daughter.
Absolutely.
And yet I listened to this podcast going back to why we're here, and none of that was discussed. None of those were brought to the front of how there could be other ideas, other ways to not be perceived as just a single mum. And what have you done, Claire? What have you found that you've done as extracurricular things to support, whether it's your daughter or other people's children? Because you do a lot in education, and I think we haven't really touched on that here.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting one. And if I was going to be completely honest, Lou, I wouldn't necessarily make all of the same decisions again. Like you said, I wouldn't. I think I've often supported others to the detriment of my child. I do believe that. I do believe that. And with different things that I've been involved in on a charitable level or within the community or within my work. And like I say, some of that my daughter's been involved with. She's been able to come along and she's seen things that she's been to events that we've run for teenage girls, or she's been along to a refuge where I've been working, supporting as chair of the Halo Project charity.
Yeah.
And it's that deeper understanding that she has learned of other things that are going on within the world of education and generally within the wider communities and society. But in terms of what I've done, interestingly, my passion for education, literacy, growth, careers has all benefited her in some way via osmosis, hasn't it? It just has.
Yes, of course.
And yes, I did do some when I went back to university when she was small. And I studied education. I went into her school to do teacher training. I went in to do some voluntary work. So exactly like you described, I wanted to be there and be visible for her. I could have gone to a different school, but I went to that one on my doorstep as well, so that I could be there and she could see me and I could be in that environment with her and understand a bit more about the working day, the school day, etc., and contribute and hopefully support the professionals that were working in that environment. So there are things we can do. Not everybody's job permits that, though, hey?
No,
It's not always
that's
possible.
true. Yeah, absolutely. Although I think outreach is becoming a thing at work and we are slightly better.
Yes.
But we also know, unfortunately, the world is going backwards, particularly around women's issues, women's health. And that's a whole other podcast. But how do we get past shame? What's your view of how do we get past shame being the real enemy? Because I still think if I say the words to people, well, I was a single mum, there is a bit of a like, well, why? Why did you choose to have children? I mean, I could only have one child. I've documented this in other podcasts. And the amount of people that have said to me, aside from being a single mum, this is a great one. Why did you only have one child? I'm like, you don't know my story. You don't know my story. But this judgment of how could you just stick with one child? Now, whether I choose to tell that story as to why I only have one child, and I'm not embarrassed about it. My body wasn't able to bear me more. And she wasn't my first child. So, but I find it amazing in 2025, still shamed. How do we get past shame to give those listeners on this podcast hope?
Well, it depends where, right. Shame is obviously such a broad topic, isn't it? And it depends whether that shame is our own internal processing or whether we feel it comes through judgment of others. And as we know, working mums are judged constantly, as is the basis of this podcast. We are judged every single day. We are judged if we are dropping the children off early at a kids club and running away, or picking them up a minute late, or calling somebody to help out, or we're asking if we can take some time off because the child isn't well. We're constantly judged. And I think the shame is immense because we feel we're failing all the time. We feel we're failing as parents, and we feel we're failing in our careers or in our jobs, whatever it is we do, because we're constantly letting somebody down. We're letting ourselves down. And there's this horrible sense of guilt that lives with us as a working mum. And it's really, really painful, isn't it? It's horrible. And there is a lot of that judgment comes from other women, I have to say. A lot of it comes from other women. And that's what really is unacceptable. That pain and that shame when others are judging you for running off or not being there on sports day or doing whatever you can whatever you can't do that they're able to do. And it's really horrible and unnecessary. And one of the things, and I've seen somebody that I know write about this a couple of times, she gets really hacked off with how mums give her partner amazing credit when he takes the kids to school or to a kids' party. And she's like, what the hell? I do this every other day. The day he does it, he's celebrated, congratulated. What a fabulous father you are. She goes to work. Yeah. And when we all know examples of that, hey, all the time. Oh, yeah. So how does that work? And why do women think that that's acceptable? Why? And obviously that is down to our own experiences and our own environment and circumstances, and that shapes our opinions. But come on, ladies, think about it. Please think about what you're saying to other women and just be kind.
Yeah, the other one, and I think it was something like, was it Nicole Kidman in Little Lies or something? I didn't even watch it that much.
Oh, I loved that.
Episodes I watched at the school gates, I think it was. But I just remember that one I had where I turned up, dropped my daughter off at school, waved goodbye, and I could overhear a conversation about a lunch thing or something with all the mothers. And I said, oh, what's that? You're all heading out for lunch? And it went stone cold quiet. It's like, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not invited. And I said, and they looked at me and they said, oh, we would have invited you, but you work. And I went, oh, that dirty little 4-letter word. Oh dear. So I'm not in the club. I probably would never be in the club. I was so angry.
Yeah.
I thought, of course I'm not going to come. But ask me, inclusiveness. I'm one of the mothers. I bring your children home sometimes, even if it's not me personally. They're coming back to my house. I'm feeding them. But it was just a really interesting moment. And then when she went that was at primary. But when she went to senior school, it was different because loads of people worked. We were in a very different world. And I remember her saying to me, actually, we haven't really talked about the difference between daycare, primary and senior school, but it was quite a shift. And again, I wonder, it's a question I hadn't thought about asking you on the podcast, but I'm curious. I actually think some of what I'd actually done, not through thinking it through necessity and being a narcissistic mother, as Shira will say, prepared her for what she was then experiencing at senior school. Because those children that had helicopter parents from day one, suddenly needing to find their way home, know what bus to get, working their trip, could get home. The others couldn't. They didn't know what to do.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. Yeah. I had a great conversation at the weekend with somebody who I must introduce to, a fabulous woman called Nahala Summers, who's written books on kindness. She's a massive kindness advocate and truly believes that if we are leading with kindness, then that has a knock-on effect on our colleagues, our teams, business and communities and society as a whole. And we had this chat about kindness, and we talked about tough love and tough kindness. and how relevant this is to parenting, and how, it's about setting boundaries, isn't it? Kindness isn't about being nice. It's about compassion, and it's about nurturing in the right way, and it's setting boundaries. And I think in terms of parenting, that tough kindness and that tough love is about boundaries for you and for the child. Hey, so it's actually saying, understanding why no is no, and having that clarity around what's acceptable and what isn't, instilling values and demonstrating and living that, and all of those other things that are so important. But I love that tough kindness. I think is what, hopefully, what we've lived as working mums.
Yeah, and again, I think, just bringing it back to being present also, those times in the evening where I did actually, get home straight after dinner in time for bedtime, and that was always my thing, always had to be, bar the odd event, but, was always home for bedtime, was that sense of being totally and utterly present. And that when I was home, that was it, that it did try not to spill over. I mean, depending on the role, obviously, and
Yes.
there's other people and lots of people with 24-hour jobs. And we're now in a world where you're supposed to be holding one of these the whole time and answering 39 seconds a minute and all that sort of stuff. So I get it. But I think that sense of once I'm home and I'm totally, engaged. And she said to me the other day, actually, I don't think we would have gone on as many holidays and had the times and experiences of, seeing the world if you hadn't a work mum. So I just wonder what that would have looked like as well, because I was able to provide once a year. I don't think we would have had.
I was just going to say, that just reminded me of one of the comments in the podcast and the interview when Stephen Bartlett was saying, well, what about work? How do people not be working parents? And she said, well, it's about making sacrifices. It's about for that length of time, isn't it? And she was saying, you just manage. You just have to manage. You just have to make those sacrifices. So like you say, it's about, where do you draw the line? And what about the experiences and the agency that you're giving your children by taking to them these different places and allowing them to sort of witness different cultural activity around the world, or just learn and absorb and be curious about different things and places and people. That has a value. But I'm not saying that isn't a privilege, because it is. But for us, I think it was important that we gave our children that, and that was the sacrifice that we made, was not being there for some of the other time in order to give them that.
Yeah. And actually, you've just completely blown a thought in my head, actually. And I'm not obviously going to, for obvious reasons, say too much about this circumstance. But I know somebody, I'm going to change this very slightly because I don't want it to be obvious who it is. But I know somebody very, very well who, for all the wrong reasons, has ended up a single father and is doing the best that he can do. And actually, he's doing amazing, right? But he's not doing anything any different to probably what you and I did at all. Circumstances have prevailed in this man's life where he's having to hold down a full-time job. He's got 2 sons, which is quite hard work. I think boys are harder younger. I know it'll get easier when they go to sleep at the age of 13 to 19. But at the moment, it's hard work. And he has to go to work every day. And he has to have a big network around him. In some cases, he's had a bit of social services involved. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the circumstances. Social services, I might add, are not because of him. But the reason why I say this is whenever I hear anybody speak about him, and he didn't ask for these circumstances either, right? He didn't go out to create these circumstances. It is held with such, awe-inspiring comments. Even if he leaves his kids to go on dates, good for him. Good for him, right? Get out there. And I do want him to meet someone else, of course. But it's like, could you imagine if I'd gone to work all day, come home for an hour, fed my daughter, put her to bed and went on a date? I don't think I'd be getting the same comments. Would you?
Yeah. No, and actually, I loved something that you said, and it just triggered a sort of Brené Brown kind of quote. But he's doing the best he can. He is doing the absolute best he can, and aren't we all? Aren't we all? Isn't that what this is about? Our circumstances are all completely different and we're all doing the best we can. But there is so much judgment about what we're doing and whether that fits with somebody else's opinion of what their best would be or what they think you should be doing. Yeah, but that whole gender thing is very, and it is hard for single parents of any sex. Of course it is. But I think the judgment around single parent women going to work is just very, very different.
Yeah, and again, just why we wanted to sit and have this chat today in our coffee morning was really because we don't feel there has been a big enough response to the Stephen Bartlett podcast. And, you know, I know my podcast probably doesn't have anywhere near the followers that Stephen has, and whether
Just yet.
whether it will get more PR because of this. That wasn't actually, seriously, and I say I want this for the record, this isn't about going up against Stephen Bartlett. And I mean that. What my whole ethos now and purpose, as you know, Claire, is about creating a voice for impact, whether that's yours or anybody else's that comes on this podcast. And it's about being a voice on the edge of change, which I seriously believe we are with our educational work and with our coaching work and leadership work. But for me, I felt, and you, because we haven't stopped talking about it, which is why we're here, this real sense of narcissistic mothers that leave their children would never be said to a narcissistic father, because there isn't such a thing, apparently. And what we wanted to do is to talk about the legacy and allyship that we've had. And that sort of leads me to the sort of final part of the podcast, which is, you know, how can we bring this home for people that connects it to a much larger movement for people? You know, that we, because I want to honor somebody who, unfortunately, and when I designed this podcast for us, she was still alive, and I had a sliding doors moment where I should have had lunch with her, but we all got locked up just as we'd arranged the lunch. But if anybody knows of Dame Stephanie Shirley, who you may know as Dame Stevie, and therein lies another story, because in order for her to be the trailblazer that she was a woman who came over on the kinder transport after Auschwitz and Bergenstein camps, and she was reunited with her family eventually, but essentially she was incredibly bright. She was an engineer. She was an absolute trailblazer, and she became a mother, and she changed her name at work to Stevie or to Steve. She signed off all emails either Steve or Stevie because she couldn't get taken seriously as a woman, 1940s, 50s, 60s, as a woman in technology. She's gone on to win many awards. She's a dame. But more importantly, she had a son. I believe she only had one child, but she had a son who was severely autistic. And I think what I would just say is that in those days, nobody actually knew what that was. They were called much other unkind words, which I won't say for the podcast because I actually don't like them. But we know that they were called terrible words. And actually, he was locked up in an institution. And I don't know if anybody knows this about Dame Stephanie, and you will if you ever read her book, Let Go or Let It Go. She talks about a suicide pact that she had with her husband if they couldn't give him the care that they needed because they weren't prepared to go through life. Even though she was working, even though she was married, she still couldn't help her son as much. But through her life's work, which was why I wanted to meet her, was because she was a massive philanthropist in autism in particular. And I was building a community school for an autistic provision, and that's why I was off to meet her for lunch. As I said, it didn't happen, but I've always held a big torch to her. But I really invite all motherhood as part of this podcast and not see it as a binary home versus work, but as a spectrum of courage, as a spectrum of care and contribution to society. And I just wondered how that lands with you on what you see as legacy and allyship, and where's allyship come in for you that's been important in raising your daughter?
Well, like I say, I think the allyship to some extent for me was with family who supported my need and desire to work. Because at the end of the day, like I have to be clear about that. Like I'm saying, it was a need, but it was also a desire to work and then do well at what I was doing, so that we did have a certain standard of life and that my daughter could have the best possible start in life. But I think allyship for me, there are so many ways that people can do so much more, Lou, as we know. And things are improving to some extent, but there are many, many benefits to everyone if employers and leaders can actually look at how they can embrace working mums. Because like you say, being a working mum isn't a contradiction. You are getting somebody who is there, is strong and wants to make a contribution. And with some additional support and care of them, they can actually really value their leadership and feel that they belong at work and be a better person and mum at home. So I think there's so much more in terms of allyship that we can do in terms of policy and practice, making working hours more flexible, understanding when women are in need of additional support at certain times in their careers. And going back to Dame Shirley, yeah, I had a really interesting day recently, and it was the Women in Engineering Day, and we had an event up at Durham University. And one of the engineers there was talking about how what the biggest regret of her life is the choice she made. She genuinely believed she had to make the choice between having a family or continuing in her career. And she continued in her career. And she does not want that to be a choice that other women have to make. There are times when women have to take some time out when they are bringing up a family, but that does not mean that they do not bring so much to that workplace in terms of skill and knowledge and diversity and all the other things that we know diversity brings. So it's allyship has to come from women and men. And like you said, going back to those school gates, if we could just stop some of that judgment, if we could stop some of that criticism that creates more guilt and shame when we're already struggling at times, I think we could do a lot more by just being kinder to each other.
I think that's absolutely right. And, one of the things we wanted to do with this podcast was to rally others to tell us what they think. And we've only scratched the surface today. And I'm sure we could carry on this subject. But, having felt judged for choosing both love and livelihood, I think that's a really big question and something that I'd like our listeners to think about, that this is your permission slip, actually, is what we're saying, right? That this is your time to say, actually, I can choose both. Very much you're saying, and actually I can choose not to have children if I choose not to have children. They are making choices or feeling or freezing their eggs for a later stage in case they change their mind. And we know that that's going on. And again, no judgment on that, but there are women who are choosing to freeze eggs to give themselves a longer chance at a career before they go on to have children. What does that say about society that we're even businesses, law firms are offering that as a perk? It should work.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. That permission slip allows you to be who you are. It allows you to make those decisions in the knowledge that you are doing your best. And that does not mean that you are failing in one place or another. It means you are doing your utmost and managing in very challenging circumstances often. But you have got permission to breathe and just be you and acknowledge the struggle, but actually also ask for help as well. That is something that lots of people feel that they are inadequate or admitting to inadequacy or failure if they ask for help. But actually, lots of people would be so willing to give help, either in the workplace or otherwise, but they think that somebody is coping. And I think we can often be our own worst enemy because we are independent and we are proving that we can do it and we will soldier on and we are resilient, when actually at times you do really just hope that somebody will say, can I give you a hand? But we're too proud to often ask for it. And I think we need to and acknowledge that we are doing our best, but that doesn't mean that we can't benefit from the support of others.
So asking for help and not being afraid to ask for help. And I think that's something that actually a lot of people struggle with, right? And because it's seen as a failure or a sign of weakness. Yeah. Oh, well, she shouldn't have had the child. She shouldn't have gone back to work. I'm sure my mother said that about me a lot. You chose to go back to work and now you're asking for help. Have you heard that one? And actually, in a world where we really, really do need to be kinder, I think that we should get behind more people and be able to help them. If you haven't listened to the Feminism Debate on the 19th of June, 2025, with Stephen Bartlett, then I and a bunch of other women, I would urge you to do that and have a listen. And actually, I would really love below this podcast. Oh, we've got a little friend. Shall we meet your friend? Your
Come
companion?
on, Yogi, come and say hello.
Oh, Yogi. We've always got to have a dog in a podcast. I know me makes
Absolutely.
quite an appearance at many, but no, seriously, we really need to support you, support others to build a movement. And we'd love to know whether you found this podcast helpful, informative, whether you've got more views that we haven't actually talked about, that you think we've skipped a subject, because maybe Claire and I can come back again. But as I said, this wasn't a PR stunt, and I really genuinely mean that. I just felt when talking to Claire, Shira, and a few other mothers that actually the fact that we have been called narcissistic mothers on this podcast was just something we couldn't, could we, Claire? We couldn't let it go. So Claire, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. Have you got any other last wise words that we haven't talked about on the podcast that you might just want to add?
I don't know about wise words, but I think going back to our original outrage and reaction and the rationale behind this conversation, just remembering those times, Lou, that I'm sure you had as well, where you sat crying, desperate because you're tired and you're trying your hardest and you're juggling and you can't be everywhere that you need to be. It's really, really hard. And I get so emotional about it because, like we've said, being a working mom is not a contradiction. It's tough, it's courageous, and it hopefully provides lessons to our families, and it helps us to contribute to the wider society. And I do believe that classic phrase that it takes a village to raise a child, and it's not about us staying at home to do that. It's about embracing everybody around us, role models, and supporting our young people so that they can be the best they can be and the best for the world.
Yeah, and I think actually if you follow Mylene Class, she always congratulates the village that helps her to support her. I mean, she's been a single mom for an awful long time. I know she's got a partner now and he's very, very good and he's very involved. But she always credits the village and, gets angry when people have judged her for whether it's walking away from a relationship or trying to work and do as much as she does. And if you follow her on Instagram, you might argue she's never home if you believe everything that you see on Instagram. But I think that sense of, being able, she wrote a book actually, having been a single mom. I think I'll just call that out here because she wrote a fabulous book that I've bought for my nieces and nephews called What They Don't Teach You at School. And so like how to change a tire, how to change a light switch, all that sort of stuff. And I just thought how great that was written by a working mom. So
Absolutely.
Good on you, Mylene.
Yeah. I've just thought of something else, and I don't know whether it's appropriate to mention it in here, Lou. But I just think I'll flag it because there is an organisation that I've done a bit of work with called Mama Social Co. And they have set up a movement which operates across the UK. And that was born out of somebody's desperation due to mental health after giving birth. And she reached out because she needed help, reached out on Facebook, and now has groups of women who meet up on a weekly basis for a walk in nature, supporting each other. So they've got that real peer mentoring, and they talk about the importance of a village, and that's people who can relate to where you are in your life at that point. So that might help some working mums who are maybe questioning their identity, struggling with newborn children. That could be a great source of support that people might want to look into.
Yeah, so that was Mama Social. Yes, they can find that on Google, Mama Social. Absolutely right to mention those things. We are, just to close, voices on the edge of change. We hope that the subjects that we raise here, be it for fun, be it in response to an angry podcast, whatever it might be, it is about being voices on the edge of change. And I think, if we can follow people you've mentioned her already, Mylene Class, who completely changed the narrative on miscarriage for women in the workplace and how you deal with miscarriage and how you're looked after in the workplace for miscarriage. I've got another girlfriend who is trying to change the narrative and do very much what Mylene is doing. Also a single mum, and by the way, single mum who chose to adopt and bring up a child. Now some people might be very selfish, but this particular child had been in the care system to 8 years old with nobody wanting him. And she was absolutely desperate that he would absolutely not grow up in care. And she's also driving a movement on adoption and changing the rules for looked after children with adoption. She's all about walk with adoption. Her name is Susie James. I'm just going to give a bit of a big up to her because what she's doing isn't dissimilar to what Mylene Klaas has done around miscarriage and desperately trying to do that through her PhD. So I think, one of the things I'd say is that there are very strong women who choose that route, or even if it's chosen for them, they haven't chosen it, come up stronger and will lead with purpose. And I think, again, it's about leadership. So, Claire, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we could have talked much longer. It's been a fascinating podcast. And I just would like to, in some ways, thank the conversation on the Feminism Debate, which was again on the 19th of June on the Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. And I am really curious for your comments. So please drop a comment below. I know I say this on every podcast. I know it's boring, but please subscribe, because the more you subscribe and the more you drop comments, the more speakers I can get and the more interesting conversations I can bring you. So Claire Preston, it's been an absolute dream to sit down with a really good mate and just chew the fat, as Joe Good would say, on something so close to our hearts. Thank you. Well, that was an interesting conversation, slightly different to the conversation that I generally have. It's more work-led and also where we're trying to think about something that we want to change. But actually, this is something we want to change. We want to change the feminism debate. We want to change in 2025, in the world that we live in today, that working mothers are not seen as narcissistic. And the more that word was used throughout the Diary of the CEO podcast with Stephen Bartlett, the more angry I was getting. And actually, I found there was very little defense from the rest of the panel about why we were perceived to be narcissistic mothers. And my reflections in this podcast are, when we spoke about male parents, it was always seen as a positive that they were trying their best because that's all they could do. And isn't it great that they were trying their best? And it was always huge positives for anybody's husband or partner that was dropping off at school gates, that they were doing something really phenomenal by going into work just that bit later. But yet working mothers didn't get that. We talked about the things that you can do if allowed, and obviously if capable, and if the opportunities were there for you to be involved through outreach projects and other ways of showing up to be involved in your child. The fact that you can give wonderful skills to your children, or that you do give wonderful skills to your children. And again, I'm sure there are some negative sides. My daughter might say that she craved certain things a bit more. Neither Claire nor I have sat here and judged ourselves as phenomenal mothers. I don't think that came out at all throughout the podcast. We were just doing our best. And actually, even if you're involved in what is perceived to be a nuclear family, I would argue that every parent is just doing their best. And most parents either do exactly what their parents did, or they do the total opposite. So depending on your journey, depending on how you've been brought up, and depending on the circumstances. I think the other thing I'd just say that we didn't really get into massively, but it is something to reflect back in the podcast. We chose not to live on the benefit system. We chose to get up and make sure we contributed to society. And we could have chosen the easy road, some might argue. I'm not sure being on benefits, by the way, is the easy road. But we could have given in. We could have given in to societal norms, and we could have just sat here and bled the benefit system dry and waited for our children to go to university or not, and then decide what we were going to do with our lives. But we didn't. We got up, we grafted, and we contributed to society. Not because we were narcissistic mothers, because we were narcissistic mothers, and we wanted to be the caregivers of today. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Whether we carry female guilt, I'm sure we do. I think you carry it whether you're a single mum or not a single mum, quite frankly. But I ask you to ask yourself, are you a narcissistic mother or a narcissistic mother? Do you know a narcissistic mother, or do you feel they're a narcissistic mother? Let's just do one thing and one thing only out of this podcast, and that is to stop romanticizing over what caregiving is and start thinking about kindness and necessity. Thank you once again for listening, and please subscribe.